Well, hello everyone. Is everybody enjoying Gen Con?
Doesn't sound like they're enjoying Gen Con.
No, they hate it.
Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I'm Peter Adkison, your host of the show and of this panel. So welcome also to our series of retrospective panels. We, in honor of 50 years of tabletop gaming history, we curated a series of panels covering just topics. You know, you can't cover everything, but a selection of topics throughout the history of the last 50 years. We had a panel on Gen Con 1 with 4 people who were at Gen Con 1 on the panel. That's kind of where we started and worked our way forward. So this panel today is called Resurrects D&D. Which was, of course, about 3rd edition D&D, which all of us played a part in. And so joining me on the panel is the design team from 3rd edition. So I will let you guys introduce yourselves, and before I forget to ask it later, I think this would be a good time to kind of jump ahead and tell us what you're up to today. It's the type of question I forget to ask. So let's just, anything you'd like to say about what your current exploits, this would be a good time. So
Sure.
We'll start with you, Rich, and work our way down.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rich Baker. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
And by the way, these mics are really good, so
Okay.
just talk normally. You know?
Okay, I don't have to boom it out.
You don't have
right
to lean. Oh, you can boom if you like.
Yeah, no,
I mean, you have one of those enviable voices.
Yeah, I've known Rich for a long time, and he booms naturally.
Yeah.
Sorry. You don't hear what my daughter says when I'm talking on the cell phone with someone. These days, I left Wizards of the Coast in 2011, and these days I wear 2 hats. The first hat is I'm one of the 3 Sasquatches behind Sasquatch Game Studio. We're just a small press outfit. We put out about 1 or 2 things a year that are things that we generally feel interested in or want to do. Most recently, we are working on a new version of the alternative science fiction game. So that's a thing we kickstarted a couple months ago and should be out early next year. The other hat is I am an author. I write fantasy and science fiction, and I have a brand new science fiction series starting in November, entitled the Sikander North series, and I happen to have an advanced reader copy of the very first book, Valiant Dust. This should be out in your friendly local bookstore in just a couple months, and I'm super excited. First of 3, and hey, I got a kid in college, so everybody buy 3.
Great.
Hi, I'm Monte Cook, and so I've been in the game industry. Next year will be my 30th year in the game industry. So I've worked for Iron Crown Enterprises and TSR and Wizards, and then I had a company called Melhavic Press. But today I am the co-owner and creative director for Monte Cook Games. We put out 5 years ago a game called Numenera, and have since then launched a number of other games. We have a game coming out at the beginning of next year, which I'm really excited about. It's a game of surreal magic, basically, and it's called Invisible Sun, and hope you can check that out. Thursday at the show, we announced a continuation of Numenera called Numenera 2.
Wow. All right.
Debbie. I'm Skip Williams. Unofficially a member of the Older Than Dirt crowd. Started out as a TSR brat when I was in high school because I lived in Lake Geneva where TSR was. Went to college, got out of college, went, I wonder if I could do anything with writing. Do I know anybody who publishes anything? Oh, wait, I do. Since then, did all kinds of things. Ran the show, as a matter of fact. Not here, not this big, but I ran the show for a while. Was contributing editor to Dragon Magazine, Wrote a little column called Sage Advice, which somebody may have heard about for just a few decades. More recently, I've been working with a lot of the small presses. So this past summer, I did something for Goodman Games, how to write game adventures that don't suck. That was lots of fun, more fun. I should have even been paid for that. That was that much fun. And I have 2 projects coming out, but they are so new that I can't even tell you about them. One of them's from Hammerdog in Fort Wayne, and they have it, but they haven't kickstarted it yet, so I can't tell you anything else about it. And the other thing is from Fort Schwab Entertainment, and that is also not even kickstarted yet. So there's more coming under my nameplate, but I really can't say anything to you about it today.
All right, well, I'm Jonathan Tweet. I got into gaming 40 years ago, and by 35 years ago, I had sort of rewritten D&D to my liking, and you can see my personal hand-illustrated notebook on display in the museum, among the other artifacts.
The Gen Con 50 Museum, that is over in Lucas Oil Stadium, right on the 50-yard line. Please stop by.
See it. It's fabulous.
It is cool.
There's also a picture of Mark Reinhagen and me from 30 years ago when we were at our first ever Gen Con selling Whimsy cards. We went on from there to create the game Ars Magica, and I joined Wizards of the Coast eventually, did Everway, did a game called Over the Edge, and finally ended up on the 3rd edition design team. Did some stuff with D&D afterwards, D&D chainmail and D&D miniatures or what have you. And then several years ago, Rob Hinso and I got together and did this game, 13th Age. So he was the lead designer on 4th, and I was the lead on 3rd, and this is our version of the game that we did for gamers like us rather than for the corporate man. Where
I think you're talking about Jim.
the corporate man wants everyone to play the same game so you can buy all their supplements, and we want everyone to play their very own game, and that's what 13th Age is about. And then I'm a giant science geek, and so I've written the first book to teach evolution to preschoolers called Grandmother Fish. That was a project that I've been working on almost as long as I was working on. It goes all the way back to my 3rd edition days, actually. Probably was around 2000 that I was first started that. And I self-published and went out of print, sold out, and now Macmillan has picked it up. So that's my latest big thing.
Yay. Excellent. Well, one more round for all 4. So I think this is the first time the 5 of us have sat together this century, probably.
In public, that's probably true.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have never had all of us on a panel before.
No, that's
Yeah.
true.
Ever.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. So this is fun. This is great. So I think that what we kind of talked about, what do we want to talk about, and I had that with all my panels. This particular panel, the conversation was the most active about what we would want to talk about, which is great, which also means I have this really long list. But hopefully, almost everything that was said was really in the context of the journey of designing the game. I mean, it makes sense. We are, this is the design team. And so so we're going to get right to it. I just want to set one little context question for each of the panelists, and then we're just going to dive in and basically spend an hour and a half or so just talking anecdotes about some of the experiences that we had, especially they had in designing 3rd edition. I'll start briefly with what my role, well, the question will be for you. When you look back at 3rd edition, when you talk to somebody, a fan, say, hey, I worked on 3rd edition D&D, and they say, well, what did you do? How do you answer that? Like, what do you look back and say, this is the piece of 3rd edition that I felt that I, where I want to plant my flag and feel good about. And so for me, I'll start with myself. I'm not a panelist, but this is the only question I'll answer for myself, I guess. Is that after we bought TSR, I think it was the next day, we said we're going to do a 3rd. I mean, I said right away. We announced it later, public later, but yeah, for sure, right off the bat, we want to do a 3rd edition D&D. I was a gamer. I felt passionately about what this would become, right, wrong, or indifferent. I was very, I had decided in my career by this point in my life that my regrets were always when I didn't make a decision I really wanted to make. You know, like to just always act on what you want in a business. And so when I acquired it, I told all the people that were going to be in the chain of command from me to you guys. So Bill Slavisek, Ryan Dancy, Mike Davis, or no, Jim Lynn, I think by that time, who was running R&D, and said, you know, you guys can take whatever else is going on with TSR, we'll follow normal chain protocol, but design team is going to report directly to me. And that was really, I think, one of the funnest things I ever did was the coast, was sitting with these guys once a week, and going. Yeah. Sometimes I would fall asleep on the couch. It was just like listening to them, these smart guys talk about role-playing game design. And it sounds
what he's really saying is that it was boring.
No, it was enchanting. It was like heaven. It was like, wow, these guys are so smart and so good at what they're doing. And I'm just going to lay here and go to sleep to it and have these wonderful dreams. I kid you not, that's what I would think. Anyway, so that's...
at times you hid that pretty well, Peter.
Yeah. So that was my role at 3rd edition. I slept through design meetings. So, all right, Rich, we'll start with you and go down the list. Yeah.
What I like to claim from 3rd edition. I actually have a little bit of a powder down for this because every now and then somebody asks me this, and this is totally. Let's be clear. This is self-congratulatory. This is not false modesty at all. But I tell people every time in this great country of ours that a barbarian flies into a rage. That is me. Every time in this great country of ours that a paladin smites evil. That was me. When a sorcerer casts his 5th fireball spell at the same encounter, that was me. So I had a chance to participate in some of the early class design and some of the early class concepting. I did move on. Actually, I'm going to stop answering because I want to. You're asking me for a quick question, so I'll just give you a quick answer.
No. This is we're in.
Sure.
We're in the. Go ahead.
All right.
Yeah.
I was going to say I was on the team for a few months, kind of early on. The Alternity game came in need of someone to step in and take charge of the creative team about 8 or 9 months into the D&D 3E process. So after doing the fun stuff of actually just like spamming out a bunch of ideas on character classes and some ideas here and there, I went off to go play with rocket ships and ray guns. You know, so some days the job's pretty cool. But those little fingerprints I have from things like the feat system, the sorcerer class, which is most of me looking at the player's handbook and saying, we have so many pages devoted to just one class. Can anybody else use these damn spells? It's real estate, it's valuable. And, so I had a lot of fun early on, and then I moved on to do some other things.
Great, perfect.
So when I joined the team, when the team was assembled, initially it was Rich and Skip and I. Jonathan hadn't joined yet, and so I thought that my role was going to be the guy who pitches the crazy ideas that everyone says, no, we can't go that far. And so I remember it was like day 1 or 2, I started saying things like, let's bring the half-orc back, let's, and the assassin, and no one said no. And so I thought to myself, I don't have a safety net here, I've got to build my own safety net. But after Rich left, Jonathan was with us, and we obviously divided up the books, and I wrote the Dungeon Master's Guide. But the real answer to this sort of is that was great, right? Writing the Dungeon Master's Guide was great. But you know what the really great part was? It was before that. It was when our job was very much as a team, and we just went, literally for more than a year, our life was, we got to work, we found a conference room that was not being used that day, and then we sat in that conference room that entire day and talked about Dungeons and Dragons, right?
And sometimes we even made notes. So. Sometimes, yeah.
Hard life.
Yeah, I mean, what better way can you think of to spend a year, right? And so it would be, you know, what's the topic for today? Second level cleric spells? Great, right? And that was fantastic. And so that's the part of it to me that really sticks with me, is sort of that group effort, I guess.
Well, that's segueing from what Monty said. My name is first on the monster manual, and I've always loved monsters. I've loved monsters. First, Lieber wrote a book. Wrote a short story called "I Love Monsters." I read that when I was about 12. Monsters are wonderful. I love monsters. I love painting figures. But keying off what Monty said, for me, it was making the game playable, because coming to this as the sage and going, what does this spell really do? Or what happens if these 4 things happen at once? What do you do? And it's like, all right, I want people to be able to answer that question at the table and get back to the game. So all kinds of things. There's a language to 3rd edition, and once you understand how the key terms work and interact, you can play the game. You don't really even need the rule book anymore, because you can guess in most cases. How does it stack? You know, all of that. Just making sure that all the pieces are there and that it all works together.
So I'm really sort of a systems guy, maybe first. You know, I love Excel and formulas and iterative, exponential factors and all that kind of stuff that goes into making the structure of a game. So everything from the basic way, what does it mean you roll 20-sided die, and what kind of things do you add to a 20-sided die, and how do you know whether you succeeded on that 20-sided die? Like those sort of fundamental or systemic things were my biggest contribution. And I have hacked through a lot of games in my time. In fact, for Peter, I hacked through the 3rd edition of the Talismana role-playing game, which was another 20-sided die game that I had to come in and redo the system and make it seem like it was before, but make it work better or what have you. So that I think the system hacking is the big deal. I also tried to have little highlights, like, you know, the kobolds think that the blood of dragons runs through them. You know, I wrote that, and I imagine everyone knows they're lying. Come on, they're kobolds. But the other designers saw this like, that's cool, the blood of dragons runs in them. And now I guess the blood of dragons does run in them. And it all seems good. I think my favorite piece, like, has the most joy per column inch, is the description on alignments, where each of the good and neutral alignments is described as the best alignment. Lawful good is best because chaotic neutral is best because, and then the evil ones are all the worst. And so that was my attempt to bring sort of the subjective nature of reality into the gaming table.
Good, great. Thank you, guys. Yeah, good. So what we want to do is kind of segue into some of the stories from the development. If I'll just take one of these that Jonathan put, unless one of you wants to jump in with one. So, okay, well, I'll just go down his list, but feel free to bounce around if you want, or interrupt each other. You know, I think the more...
We're used to that.
I will step in if I feel somebody's getting shut down, but this is most fun if you guys just start going at it. So, Jonathan writes, I want to tell the story of Skip wrestling the gargoyle in my lunchtime playtest campaign.
And then read my comment.
Yeah.
I had printed this before you commented.
Oh, that's too bad.
You can make your comment.
That was awesome. That was one of the most awesome role-playing combats I've ever had.
Well, go ahead.
Absolutely awesome.
Well, you guys.
So I was running a dungeon, a lunchtime dungeon for people where we were sort of practicing play testing the rules our very start, and so all first level characters. There was a second level fighter with a magic sword, and they went to take on the gargoyle that they knew was somewhere. And one of the things that I wanted to bring to Dungeons and Dragons is that you could do stupid things. Like you can, and so wrestling a gargoyle sounds really stupid. It's a very stupid thing to do. But
it was actually the only thing to do, but we'll get into that.
But if you're the paladin and you don't have a magic weapon, And you have to keep the gargoyle from attacking the one guy that does have a magic weapon. Then doing that stupid thing, actually, it's going to cost you, but it is going to work. And so they had this big fight. Were there 2 gargoyles?
I don't remember.
I mean, it was, well, but
I think if you were to ask my character, they would say there were all of them.
all of the gargoyles, all of the gargoyles. But the paladin threw himself on the grenade, basically, and, wrestled with this gargoyle to keep it from getting at the fighter with the sword, and the fighter with the sword was stabbing the gargoyle. And, if you wrestle with a gargoyle, you get chewed up. And he got chewed up pretty bad, but he did manage to keep the gargoyle off the guy. And so this is like, for me, this really showed how great the grapple rules were.
We can talk about that a little later.
Because it meant if somebody says, well, I don't have a magic weapon, I'm just going to wrestle the gargoyle, there is an actual rule for doing it, and the game master doesn't just go, well, you can't do that, or I don't know how to do it, or what have you. So maybe if that fight had gone better, I would have changed the grappling rules, but...
Well, the fighter got hurt anyway.
Yeah.
The fighter got killed.
Oh, and you had to pick up the
That's
sword.
right.
Oh,
And we had
geez.
just written the rule for what happens if you pick up something, which is you
Yeah.
get Appy attacked.
Yeah.
And that rule was like 24 hours old. And then that took my character to 0, and that rule was about 12 hours old.
Right. That's right.
So then I had the sword at 0 hit points. Well, what am I going to do? Well, I can take an action.
You could take an action, but it'll cost you a
That
hit
cost
point.
me a hit point,
Right.
and that was what he didn't reveal until years later is the gargoyle had 1 hit point at the time. But I hit the gargoyle and critted it. So and then we rolled it all out.
And then passed out from exhaustion.
Talk about it a lot. It was just awesome.
Well
Excellent GMing as well.
Well, actually, this next one goes right to Monty. Jonathan accused you. I totally missed this one. This one never got to me, I don't think. But he says you had this bright idea about second level spells being for second level characters.
Right. So it was this to tie into this was one of those crazy ideas that I didn't bring up because people might say yes.
No, you actually brought it up.
And so then, but not until much later.
Right.
Right. I'd sort of been sitting on the idea, but it was actually quite late in the process. I said the word level means so many different things, right? You can have a character level, a dungeon level, a spell level, right? What if we just made spell level and character level the same, right? What if when you're second level, you cast second level spells, and when you're third level, you cast third level spells, and we just we just split up the spells into more discrete levels, and people liked it, I think, more than I even kind of thought they would, but there wasn't time, right? That would have completely forced us to rewrite the whole spell system.
All right.
And then
Think
the
about
magic
the
item system?
character tables.
Well, and it is something that I implemented later in a D20 product that I wrote. So,
But it actually goes back to, part of that goes back a little farther, because there was an earlier conversation about why isn't a level a level, at least in terms of characters. It's like, why do rogues advance so much faster than everybody else? Does that make any sense?
oh right,
And
in
it
second
doesn't,
edition, for sure.
right?
Yeah,
Why isn't a level mean the same thing for everybody?
Right. Because it was weird in second edition that you would say, well, I'm a 5th level thief, well, I'm a 4th level wizard, and those don't match up mathematically in any real way.
Well, and druids and AD&D did advance like that for a while. It's second level druids and second level spells, right?
I don't
No,
remember
am I
it that
wrong?
way, but
Anybody gonna back me
If
up
Skip
on
don't
this?
remember it that way,
I don't
it probably
remember
wasn't that way.
Nobody played a druid back in those days.
I think you always had to be at least third level. Whatever, it doesn't make a difference. We're getting into the minutia. I don't remember it that way.
The level thing did get picked up in 4th edition, though, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think was kind of the biggest crazy leap that 4E said was, if you have like a 3rd level spell and a 5th level spell, and there wasn't a 4th level spell, there just wasn't a 4th level spell, right? They were like, no 4th level spells or whatever. Actually, they were like, whatever.
Yeah.
But, all right, if we'd given ourselves permission with that idea to say, it's okay to go 1st level spell, 3rd level spell, and not have something called a 2nd level spell.
Yeah.
It totally could have worked, and we would have had to relay out all the spell tables.
Yeah.
Just would have had to renumber them. But I think we hadn't quite gotten that far into the concept of this is what we ought to do.
I think I'd have vetoed it.
Such a
should have.
traditionalist.
You know, at the point where Wish goes from being a 9th level spell, and everyone knows 9th level spells are the best, and it's now a 17th level spell.
Yeah, but how
what
sexy,
hell's sacred
how
about
sexy
17?
is the idea as 20th level spells, right?
Well, yeah.
Arduin Vermifire. I played Arduin in the 80s.
So this is probably isn't on your list, but this is a story that
Go.
I want to get out there
Great.
Because it's one of my fondest memories of third edition development. And so one day, this was Jonathan, Skip, and I somewhere in the middle of the process, and we're in a conference room. We're talking about rounds and how long a round should be, and I think that Skip and I both thought
I was in that one.
Oh, you were in that one?
I remember
Okay.
that one, yeah.
He was the 12-second round guy.
Okay. You wanted
might
12
have.
second? I thought we wanted 10 second, but you wanted 6 second.
Yeah.
Combat and Tactics had 12-second rounds.
Oh,
Yeah,
right. Okay, so that makes sense.
So
Which
Even
used
Rich was
to be a
12-second
minute.
round guy.
yeah.
Right, no,
Rich
in
was-
second edition, it's
Yeah,
a minute for
right.
sure.
Yeah, Rich was counting on a little more support from me that day than he got, I think.
But Jonathan said, no, they should be 6 minutes, or 6 seconds. That way
So
you can
10
have
rounds a
10
minute. 10 rounds a
rounds in a minute, and that feels good and everything. And we said, well, that's not long enough, right? You can't do anything significant in 6 seconds. And Jonathan, argued and said, no, you can. And so we got out a stopwatch. And we had Jonathan get up and go through all the different actions that a character could do to see if he could actually do them in 6 seconds. And to his credit, right, like he played it straight. So like, if we said, okay, reach into your backpack and pull out a potion, he took the time to pull out like the wrong potion, put that back, grab another one, pull it out, right? Which is what's going to happen.
He's
And,
not making any of this up.
And and so Skip and I and Rich are there with the stopwatch, making Jonathan go through probably way more things than he really had to because it was really fun.
He was reciting. You were reciting something. Was it the Gettysburg Address?
No. I remember it. We figured that casting a spell required a short recitation, and we used the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's what it was.
And we were in a conference room that was had a big table in the middle and was cluttered with chairs around the perimeter. It's like, all right, move 30 feet around this conference room, which we figured was doing a lap of the table, while we're reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, and try to do it in 6 seconds. And
We got paid to that.
To our collective astonishment, it was possible.
So,
and entertaining.
Those were the days.
so a codicil of that is, for one reason or another, the 12-second round stayed in there for a while. And we didn't go directly to a 12-second, to 6-second round at that point. The
What did
12-second round lived a little longer.
What was it in print? Where did it
It's
land?
Oh, it was 6
Yeah,
minutes.
It's
But
6.
but the working copy of the rule stayed at 12 seconds, and then we figured out how far you really could move in 12 seconds.
But the real test is that you should have had somebody come in and start firing arrows at you while you're doing this.
Yeah, well,
See if that would sped you up
that's a
any
bad
further.
idea for all kinds
we
of
didn't
reasons.
think we didn't think you had the budget for that.
Let me finish,
Good
because
thing I
what
didn't know
happened
about
was
these,
at one
sessions
point
with the stock market.
we had the 12-second round in place. We figured out how far you could go at 12 seconds. We laid out this huge map, and then we figured out what you could do. And we had, and I might have been you. Somebody had a monk
Yeah.
and ran from one side of the board to the other side of the board and attacked something.
Yeah.
And it's like 12 seconds is just way
Yeah.
too long for the game that we've written. And that's what finally made the 6-second round happen.
So I want to tangent off the monk there. You know what the monk's greatest weakness was in third edition? Its biggest vulnerability? High rate of speed.
Yes.
Because they get to the monsters first, and all the monsters attack the monk, and every guy in plate armor comes up. Oh, it's too late. Monk's
Right,
dead.
the dwarf in plate armor. Yeah.
Yeah, same problem with barbarians, but not as bad.
All right, unless you want to be at the mercy of Jonathan's questions, think of something. How about the cleric turning rules just not working as written in the first printing?
Yeah, that was. So we were at Gen Con in 2000 in a big room introducing the player's handbook and whatever, and some guy comes up and says, on page 43 in the cleric turning rules, and by this time we had figured out that it does not work at all. Like, the numbers were totally off or whatever. So I just said, there are no problems in the player's handbook. We didn't want to even talk about it. But
All right.
that was our biggest just total snafu.
Yeah, so the target there, right, was to make undead encounters a little bit less swingy, right? That was the problem we were trying to address.
Yeah.
Right, because in earlier editions of the game, the
Explain what
cleric,
you mean by swingy, I think.
well, because what happens in earlier editions of the game is the cleric deals with all the undead, or the cleric deals with none of the undead.
Okay.
Right.
That's pretty much what
Right.
happens.
Which forces the DM's hand to probably put too many undead in the encounter, right?
Yeah.
Because he wants the encounter to be interesting if the cleric does turn all the undead, but then if the cleric fails that roll, the whole party's just hosed.
Yeah. So swinginess is one of the things that we sort of use as a technical term, because there are all these things that are swingy, which can turn out really bad for the players or turn out really good for the players. Like save or die effects are swingy.
Critical hits.
Critical hits are
Yeah.
swingy, and you want enough swinginess so that it's exciting, but you don't want so much swinginess that by the time your character would get to second level or whatever, some crazy thing has happened to them and they're dead. So
Yeah,
that's
in campaigns terms, swinginess is actually bad for player characters.
swinging. Yeah, because
It's exciting at the table, but it's bad for player characters in the long run.
right, because it only takes one thing to go really terribly wrong, and there's a TPK, and that hurts everything. And the characters usually have the advantage in a fight. So anything that makes the fight less certain, more swingy, then that makes it's a disadvantage to the players.
Right. So the goal, our goal, which we didn't fully realize, was that what we wanted was to make it so that if you have a cleric in the group and you run into undead, you're really, really happy the cleric's there and everyone pats him on the back. But if you don't happen to have a cleric, you can still deal with the undead encounter. And there's sort of a sweet spot there in the middle.
Fixed initiative. There's some reference here to the first attempt at the first playtest with fixed initiative.
Oh, fixed initiative.
Well, that's a whole. We could do a panel on initiative.
There was absolutely no rule that changed more throughout the process, probably, than initiative.
Because we experimented with the phase system, sort of like what combat and tactics use.
Yep.
We experimented with a phase system more like what you'd find in a role-playing game, where there was a movement phase and a missile, or a board game where there's movement phase and a missile phase and a combat phase and a post-combat phase. What else did we try? Good old-fashioned.
I remember there was
roll a new
a
one every round.
6-sided die initiative system and a 10-sided die initiative system and a 20.
You could have your whole group rolls for initiative, or you can have each person rolls for initiative. Those have really different effects.
And I remember the meeting where Jonathan presented his idea for what finally went out with the cyclic initiative, and basically started off with, how about everybody just takes turns?
So that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
So if you look at the blue box, the Holmes box, people went in order of their dexterity. And you just went in the same order, and it was super fast. And I never got the DMG, the AD&D DMG, so I never used the roll dice for your initiative system. And I thought it was weird to find out all these people use that system. And so, I just sort of brought what I thought was normal from my play experience. And what we found out was it was just faster. Like you think about it, and it's like, well, you should roll initiative every turn because you never know what's going to happen, and that's more exciting, and that's true. But it just takes combat longer, and the exciting things in combat are where you hit the monster for damage, and the more times you can hit the monster per minute of play, the more fun you're going to have. So the more time you spend figuring out initiative, that's less time you are actually bashing the monster. And we just learned that, wow, speed actually, if it technically looks less like combat on paper because it's more predictable, it feels more like combat at the table because it's faster.
Wow, yeah.
Well, and we also played it once. I mean, Monte, I think, did it first, and he had a little whiteboard, and he wrote it all down. You know, and everybody could see where their turn was, and,
Yeah.
and it's like, why? It's
Yeah.
like the celestial choir, even. You know, it's like this is it.
Yeah, like everyone at the table turns to you because they know it's your turn,
Right.
instead of everyone at the table looking around wondering who's going to go next, right?
Yeah.
It's totally different.
So
You know, it's been 17 years, so this all sounds like, well, of course.
I'll tell you what my well of course moment was, and this is one I still laugh at myself about. We knew from literally like day one of the process, Skip and Monty and I, that we had to flip around the armor class system, right? And Gamma World, a designer by the name of Bruce Nesmith,
Yep.
had come up with the best implementation of a roll high system using the D20 that was still in TSR's kind of family of games, and he had done it in a Gamma World edition that came out in the early '90s. But it was, it was worded kind of funny. It was explained a little strangely. And after, years and years and years of playing, at that point, we all of us had like 20 years of playing. And we're talking about 1997. We'd all been playing since the late 70s. Right. So we all had in our heads all the mental investment in Thaco and all this stuff. So we
I
kind
remember
of
when Thaco was new and radical.
But we had the thought in mind about, okay, we know we have the system where we're going to have an attack bonus, and you're going to add it to a roll, and you're going to compare it to armor class. And we wrote it out, and I understood it was better intellectually, but I hadn't yet felt it in my heart. I didn't really know that yet. Until I was running a playtest with kobolds, and kobolds being weak monsters happen to have an attack bonus of +0. And so the very first time I'm rolling a kobold attack roll with this brand new fangled tech, I'm like, okay, we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to have to do some math, I know. And I roll the die, and it's like, okay, he rolled a 17, a kobold attack bonus is +0, so that means he hits armor class 17. The light just went on, the sky parted, the sun shone. I was like, oh, now I get it. Now I see, I understand perfectly why this is just so much better.
So my road to Damascus moment is a combination of those. I was doing play tests for somebody who was trying to do. They were trying to do the computer support program that fell through for various reasons, and that's also another panel. But I sat there with people who had never played one person, other person from WotC, and four computer programmers who were long-term fans of the game, but had never played 3E before. And we had a fight on this island in the middle of a subterranean lake, and trolls and goblins were essentially doing an Omaha Beach thing, and they were fighting off these waves of monsters. And I realized at one point that we had been playing for 45 minutes, and the player characters had all run out of ammunition. We had done that many rounds of combat in 45 minutes.
Nice.
And it's like, holy
Yeah. Good. All right. I think I'm going to divert just a moment. Rich, what you said. First of all, thank you for sharing that sort of humbling sort of story. I wonder if anybody else can match Rich. Like, is there a point that somebody else on the team came up with something that you like? Oh wow, that is a really good idea. And,
Thousands, right?
yeah. Well, just pick one. If you
So
can recall one.
Monty gave us a breakthrough when we were trying to figure out how you do rerolls, right? Because you go back to 1975 Greyhawk or whatever, the thief rolls to pick the lock, they fail, they can't try again, what have you. So that was just the standard way things are done. You can't reroll. And so we're like, well, so how do we take into account, like, I've got more time to do things or whatever. At one version it was, you can only re-roll if the bonus that you're getting on this next roll is higher than the bonus you tried before. So if you want to pick the lock twice, you say, hey buddy, while I'm picking this lock, can you shove that torch in my face? I'll get a -2. And if I fail at picking the lock, then you can take the torch away. I'll be at +0, and then I'll be able to try again. And if you want to try 3 times, you hit me with the torch, and then you hit me with the hammer, and then You stop, but keep the torch. Then try again. So, and I knew that there would be players who would do that. So that didn't seem to work. And Monty was like, "How about you just re-roll? How about you just try again?" And so that turned into the take 20. You know, you're just going to roll until you get a 20. Okay, maybe you should just be able to, like,
Take
what
10,
if you
take
could
20.
just roll until you got a 20? Oh, yeah, what if you did just do that?
Yeah. Well, that goes
and then
back a
take 10
ways.
defaults out of that,
That
yeah.
goes ways a little farther back than that, because there's a whole concept of what do you do and when is it more important to just have a skill
Yeah.
versus when is it more important to just be lucky.
Yeah.
And that took months to figure out. And the two simple rules, the take 20 rule.
Yeah.
Do you have all the time in the world? You just take 20. Or
Yeah.
and is this routine? Please just take 10.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And that takes, that the take 10 rule in particular reflects that, okay, if you're good enough at it,
Yeah.
you just do it.
Right, yeah,
Right,
that's
'cause
right.
how
If it's
often-
a stretch, you might have to roll it.
Yeah. How often do you fail tying your shoes?
Yeah.
Not very often. Some people some people I know do have a difficulty with it. Guess what? You've got a dex of 8 or less, probably.
So, this is probably something most people don't know. There, in very early drafts of third edition, there was a whole class that didn't make it,
Oh, yeah.
and it was called the Spirit Master. And the Spirit Master's thing was he or she summoned a spirit, and you asked the spirit to provide you with some spells, and so your spells would change all the time because you could ask the spirit for different spells. And and there was always a roll involved, and sometimes you'd get really lucky and you'd get a higher level spell than you really should get and whatnot. And so we were playtesting, and I was running the game, and Jonathan had just sort of joined the team pretty soon before that, and was playing a Spirit Master, and basically, so everyone's in the tavern. There's a dungeon to go explore. Jonathan said, "Okay, I'm gonna roll for my spells," and he didn't roll very well. And so then he just said to all the other players, "Okay, well, let's not go to the dungeon today. Let's just wait till tomorrow." And that was very much kind of a light bulb sort of thing for me, right? I was like, okay, so Spirit Master does not work, right? You can't have a character who rolls for their abilities every day, because that's exactly what people are going to do.
We used to joke and say that because the gnome was actually not in the player's handbook for quite a while, because we thought there was a lot of hate out there in the player base for the gnome. So we used to joke about that point. It's like, well, the gnome beat up the Spirit Master and took his place. The gnome shit the Spirit Master and got.
That's right.
So some of the great stuff that we got, some of the technical stuff came from Scaff Elias and his crew. That he was working on sort of a board game version of sort of a Dungeons and Dragons, and so he was sort of off on a parallel track, sort of using what we had but hacking the rules. We played a lot in like Peter's D&D, and where he had all these very clever, analytical, exploitative players who would do exactly the sort of thing I did with the Spirit Master. Like they
Like
had,
you and Richard Garfield,
Yeah.
Scaff Alliance.
yeah, that's right, Jim Lynn.
Most of the Magic R&D team.
Yeah, and so here's the kind of stuff that they would do. Okay, we're in this. The enemy is in this tower. They're on the other side of this door. So we want to smash open the door. We roll initiative, and it's like, oh well, we win initiative. Well, we're not going to bash down the door, because then as soon as we bash down the door, the monsters will go. So we don't. For this round, we don't do anything. Then the next round, we go, okay, all right, we lost initiative. Great. So we let the monsters go first. They don't do anything. Now we bash open the door. Oh, we didn't make it. Okay. I was like, well, imagine how that would look in a movie where the heroes are like, okay, now go. Okay. And so that's right. But that's how exploitative these guys were. So we had rules for facing, like hitting somebody in the side or coming from the back, and then if someone's going to come up behind you, maybe you should be able to rotate so that they don't attack you from behind. But if you rotate and now you expose an unprotected side to somebody else, do they get an attack of opportunity? And so all the rules for what bonuses you get from what direction were, especially with these guys who were pushing it very hard, it was just nonsense. Well,
Yeah, that's an answer to the question, why is it they're facing in D&D? Well,
But you see, there really was facing in 3.0
there was some.
Yeah.
because we had those rectangular space.
Yeah.
And somebody somebody who was near and dear to the game said you can't have these rectangular spacing. You're not involved. Just go away. And by the time 3.5 came along, we said, yeah, he was right the first time.
Yeah, put it in squares,
Yeah,
right?
so
So that
everything
they're
is square.
yeah. So like horses used to be long and narrow, and now they're big.
And giants used to be, narrow and wide.
Yeah.
Right.
So, so the thing that they came up with, what SCAF came up with, was the rule for flanking, which everybody uses. You don't have to worry about what direction your miniature is pointing. You just abstract that if you're got someone hammer and tongs between you, you both get that bonus. And that flanking, he came up with that flanking rule because, well, for the board game, you don't want to have the complicated rules for facing. And we're like, that's right, we don't want to have the complicated rules for facing.
Good, excellent. The dire influence of RuneQuest on the system, such as grapple rules.
Such as the
Or did we
grapple
kind
rules.
of, I don't know if we covered that with the earlier grappling conversation.
So a lot of where I learned my how to hack a system and make it logical was from RuneQuest, and RuneQuest nailed everything down. RuneQuest had grapple rules, all sorts of stuff like undead monsters not having certain ability scores and whatever. That all came from RuneQuest. Objects hardnesses, so you're trying to cut down a door, how that works, and just also the idea that everything in the game is sort of object oriented. So that snake has a strength score, just like you do, and in fact an intelligence score and a charisma score or whatever, and that you could, if you wanted to, take the hill giant out of the player's hand or the monster manual and just, I'm going to be a hill giant. You could walk around and all the rules would totally work for you, regardless of whether you were a player character or something out of the monster manual. And that was RuneQuest's influence, and also yours, Peter. You were very simulation oriented, right?
Yeah,
Like things should make sense in the world.
Yeah.
I used to think of it actually as a physics engine,
Yeah.
right? Just like a good, well-designed MMO these days has a very strong physics engine. The thing that I think 3E did that I didn't really see coming when we started the process was that it developed a strong, robust physics engine for D&D to kind of explain how things would interact when you otherwise wouldn't know how they interacted.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing that 3E did very well is it managed to avoid a lot of pitfalls that went along with some of those older systems too.
Yeah.
Again, we had a couple of devil's advocates. Oh, you can't do that because of this. Well, you know what? We just aren't going to allow that. We're going to have the good part of that problem, and we're going to just throw out the bad part of that problem, and it will work. And it did.
The origin of feats.
You just talked
Everybody
about
has-
that a little bit.
Yeah.
Rich, you want to?
Yeah.
We started off by looking at non-weapon proficiencies and kind of asking ourselves, what the heck are these good for from second edition, if you remember those. And there was weird stuff like fire building and
Yeah. That's my
work
pet
and-
peeve.
Yeah, whatever they were. But
Yeah, spend one slide on fire building and then another slide
Yeah.
on shipbuilding. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, those are exactly
Yeah.
the same scale of difficulty.
But in looking at what would make those kind of better, we started groping towards the idea of a skill system that then bolted on interesting skills in that set of proficiency, the non-weapon proficiencies, and realized when we started putting things that were like power, attack, and cleave, and two-weapon fighting in that tree, that we were really creating what we referred to essentially as like super skills and regular skills. And we realized that there's no way we can have people trying to purchase both those things out of the same resource pool, because everyone's going to buy the super skills, and no one's ever going to take rope making again, right? And maybe that would actually have been okay. But long and short of it is, at the point where we realized we actually have two different, we got cats and dogs here. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
That at that point was a moment where we realized, okay, we're developing a separate set of talents almost that really will help refine different things like fighting styles and let you really customize the way you do things. And actually, I wound up writing a first draft of the feed system. So I tend to write when I design. A lot of times I'll just throw placeholders out there just to kind of keep an idea in mind and run with it. So I just was making almost like just fun, ridiculous names on these things. Some of them were pretty obvious, like power, attack, cleave, combat expertise. Those are pretty
But they
obvious.
were actions. They were like ride by attack, or
Yeah.
they were heroic feats that you could do.
Right.
It wasn't just something like I've got more hit points.
Right.
It was all flashy.
Yeah.
In fact, they were called heroic feats
Heroic feats,
before
yeah,
they were
yeah.
feats.
Before they were feats, yeah.
So like
Before
one of
that,
Or in
the,
some cases, they were called fighting styles. We had.
so there was like the mounted archery feat at one point was called Born a Mongol, right? You
Yeah.
just ride by and shoot people with arrows all the time, just like,
My personal
the
favorite working title was "Got Your Back, Joe."
Oh, yeah.
All right, what did "Got Your Back" show? What is it? Anybody? Anybody? It's a precise shot.
Precise.
But it's actually amazing how long into the process some of those names persisted because we just hadn't gotten around to renaming them. And people are actually starting to get antsy about it. We're not really going to have this feat called this year. No. We'll come up with a better name. Well, today would be a good day to come up with a better name.
I can remember in that regard the day we had a whiteboard and that the day that we started going through the non-weapon proficiencies, which we were just going to call proficiencies. We hadn't even called them skills yet, I think. And we were having this kind of conversation, and we started dividing them up into 3 different groups, and we just called them A, B, and C. And we were putting all the things like cooking and basket weaving and whatever in the A column, and then the B column were skills that you used you actually used in the game, right? Things that used to be thief skills, right? Climbing and jumping and those kinds of active things that you actually probably really want to get good at. And then we had this sort of miscellaneous C column for the stuff that didn't really fit, and that's the stuff that became feats.
Right.
Yeah. That was another one of sort of those light bulb moments as we looked at that C column and we're like,
It's like,
oh,
Dean,
wait
none
a
of these things actually, we're not rolling a dice for most of these things.
Right,
There's no check for these things. You can just do them. Things like alertness and
right,
all of that stuff. It's like, it's just things you can just do.
right.
So if they're not the same, we better call them something else. I was big on that, personally. If it's not the same, call it something else. It is the
Jonathan,
same.
I thought you speaking of that, by the way. Jonathan has a rule that he introduced very early on called same or different.
Right.
And I have passed that on to dozens of people across the years, the same or different advice. The basic thing is if you have 2 things, do you want to give the rule, by the way? I don't want to.
Sure, yeah. If you got 2 things in the game, they should either be exactly the same so that you know how they work. Like if different people have detect magic, have them all do detect magic the same way. Or if they're going to be different from each other, have them be really, really different. So like if the druid's detect magic is different, don't have it like it's got a different range or something minor, right? Have it like, no, the way druids detect magic is really different.
Right.
And
And then applying what Skip just said, right, and then call it something else,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Speculative plans for the big book of highfalutin role playing.
So I don't know, do you remember that, Monty?
I do.
counter.
So the idea was that we had a very crunchy system, and we recognized that there was a significant part of the audience that wanted to develop their character and talk about their character's background and talk about more interpersonal relationships and encounters where you talk, you don't swing your sword, and then I actually think that what I proposed was that there's that, and then there's the big book of bashing down doors, which is exactly the opposite, right? And it's even crunchier, more crunchy stuff, and obviously the big book of highfalutin role playing, which isn't what we really would have called it, but that's what we were calling it. Never happened.
Yeah.
But
I mean, but that was sort of my background. I had done some real highfalutin role-playing games, and I think in a lot of sort of the top-level second edition players sort of felt this way, that the best game session is one where you don't roll any dice. Like as a game designer, I'm like, why am I telling you how to roll the dice? Like that should be. Are you telling me it's not fun? Combat isn't good? You don't like that? So we very intentionally turned third edition back into something that you could get really tactical about. And so we knew that there were going to be some people who were like, well, I don't like that. I don't, or what have you. And even I, for example, have this tendency to try to make things more character-oriented or story-oriented and what have you. And so that was sort of this, like a square-up reel. Okay, yeah, we took the game in this really crunchy thing, but we haven't forgotten about role-playing. was the idea.
And then we forgot about role playing.
And then people,
Well, we didn't do anything about it.
people love the crunchy stuff so much. Like, we thought we were going to lose players.
Right.
We talked about what percentage of the playing audience can we lose, and it's still a good idea to revise the game for the long-term success. And boy, we did not lose any players.
How about that idea you had that we would publish different versions of the player's handbook, and the rules would be exactly the same, but the art would be different,
Yeah.
right? So we would have, we had that third edition look, right, which really wasn't something that we had a lot of input on, but it's fine. But there's also sort of the more classical fantasy second edition look. Well, why not publish the third edition player's handbook, but use that more kind of classical art, and and that appeals to the people who like that, right? And maybe we could do an anime version,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that was really cool. We never did that either, obviously.
I mean, probably a terrible idea from a marketing perspective. Now that I look back at it with more experience, it's like you want to provide a brand promise.
Well, given hindsight, right, because it was a very successful product. If we had seen
Yes. If we'd wanted to reach more people
and we had seen huge portions of the market kind of calve off
That's right.
because we lost them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, how many different versions of Monopoly are there?
True.
I mean, we had a short print runs. It could have worked.
But it's almost what D20 was in a way.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit.
The multi-class system, sort of.
There were a lot of those too.
Well, that was the example of what I call the universe ending question, right? And I think it was you who answered it. It's like, okay, we have dual class characters in second edition.
Yeah.
We have multi-class characters in second edition. Why?
Yeah.
Why is there a system for dual class characters, and why is there a system for multi-class characters? And it's like, guess what? There isn't a good answer to that question. Oops.
Yeah, so there were versions where the multi-class were sort of like the fighter, wizard, elf, right? Where you could play, here is the write-up for the cleric thief. And the cleric thief has this experience point table and
The Beck-me approach, yeah.
Yeah, and
Right.
but we didn't like that, and we wanted people to have more options, and finally we needed a multi-class system, even though we didn't have a ton of time to play test it, and this was sort of a system that I'd always wanted to try, because in theory it seemed like it would work, and it did work in theory.
It did work. Well, it did work because a level is a level in 3E.
It did work, and
It didn't work the same as the old one.
The problem with it is that it has the same sort of approach that we took to like colossal scorpions. It was sort of like, if there were a colossal scorpion, these are the stats it would have. And what we really should have said is, those are terrible stats for a monster, and we don't want that monster in the game. It's true that a colossal scorpion would have those stats, but it doesn't make a good 12th level monster or whatever. And we could, and this was the same thing. It's like, well, it's true that if you were a fighter wizard using these rules, this is what your stats would be like, but that doesn't turn out to be a nicely playable class. So the problem is, because there was one universal system that works totally differently depending on how you're combining the classes. Some, like the fighter, ranger, paladin, is a barbarian. That's a pretty nice multi-class, right? And then there are plenty of other classes. The wizard, cleric, druid, sorcerer is a terrible multi-class. Right? And so,
I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'm glad I got to see how it worked.
For the 3 system, I actually love the narrative that is implied by the way those levels get stacked on. It tells a story about how a guy comes into blunders into an adventuring career, and I used to study this, and then I realized I needed to go study this, so I took some levels of that, and it's very logical, right?
Yep,
I mean, it makes sense. It
opens up the prestige classes too, right?
Yeah,
Like then you
yeah.
have this whole new type of class that you can only multi-class into.
Yeah.
I just have to add, just because I think it's funny. Early in the stages when we were thinking about sort of just creating basically multi-class classes, right? So
Yeah.
rather than mixing a fighter thief, we were just going to make a fighter thief,
Yeah.
and that was a class that you could choose. But each one of those multi-classes got a name,
Yeah.
and we were gonna call the cleric thief the evangelist.
Yes. That was mine.
That's it.
That was when I was playing Monte. It's like, we really can't call this class the evangelist, right? It's the cleric thief class. We can't call it that. And they went, oh, yeah, let's do that. And I went,
All right,
that was
the Greyhawk setting as the default setting. There's some.
That actually wasn't something that was I think originated in our team. It kind of came to us from.
Oh, that came from on high.
Yeah. Because it turns out some people had a lot of love for Greyhawk. Peter.
Actually, I think that might have been Ryan.
I think
right?
I think it was Ryan.
Lisa also was crazy about Greyhawk. And
Yeah, I think it was. I think maybe I can represent the thoughts from over in the marketing vector, which is that I think the idea was that we have the belief was, and Skip would be the most knowledgeable on this because you've been at it the longest, that Forgotten Realms was the setting that everything had been defined.
Yeah.
So many maps, so many versions, so many novels, a lot of work, and that Greyhawk had been left as something more sketchpad, more like you can make this yourself.
Plus all the spell names.
Yeah, Nystel's Magic or
Right.
We're all
They were all
Greyhawk
Greyhawk
names,
names.
Lord
right?
Kynan Sword or Hound or
Yeah.
I was all behind it. I thought it was partly just because you need names for the deities, right? Like you don't want to be. I'm a cleric of the sun god. All right, whatever. But Pelor, just whatever. I'm a cleric of the sun god named Pelor, and suddenly it feels a lot realer.
But it caused problems too.
Yeah.
Right, because
Like what?
Like
axes and swords.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, favored deity weapons. Right, there wasn't a longsword god basically.
Right. The paladin sword, the paladin deity had a battle axe as
Right,
their
and we
chief
wanted
sword.
paladins to have long swords, and so that was not fit. I remember, so one of the sort of nasty legacies from first and second edition were things like, gender differences between characters and their stats and stuff, and we knew we wanted to get rid of that and make it so that in the D&D world it doesn't matter, right? If you're a paladin, you're a paladin. It doesn't matter if you're a male paladin or a female paladin, right? And that means that in a logical sort of sense, if you're going to use the third edition rules to create a world, you would make half the powerful people in the world female and half the powerful people male, right? There's just no reason you wouldn't do that. And I can remember sitting in the room with the people, the Greyhawk experts, and us saying that and them just kind of staring at us because, of course, that wasn't true of Greyhawk at all. And
A little underrepresented in the circle of 8,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were all dead anyway at that point because we already killed them all.
But we did get to make changes so that the paladin was named, the paladin god was named Hieronymus, right? We switched them from axe to longsword to make them suited better, and that made the Greyhawk people unhappy. And if we had tried to do that to Forgotten Realms, I think it would have been a much harder sell to we're going to change these things now because we want to support the imagination of the players better rather than stick to your canon. It worked for Greyhawk because it just had a smaller fan base.
Well, and less product
material.
development. Yeah.
it would have been pretty sweet, though, to just create a third edition world from scratch.
Yeah.
That would have been cool.
Yeah.
Gygax's comments about the DMG.
I remember, Monte, you were really impressed with that.
So we sent manuscript pretty late in the process. We sent manuscripts of the third edition books to Gary, and I can remember, because I had worked on the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. So when I started playing D&D, it was with the little brown booklets, but I didn't actually own any of the little brown booklets. The first book that I owned and sat down to read was the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and that was, by Gary Gygax, and really super important and formative to me. Really very formative overall for me.
You're talking about the AD&D.
AD&D first edition Dungeon Master's Guide.
Cover art, by the way, is in the Gen Con 50 Museum or Lucas Oil Stadium.
That is pretty awesome.
Cover art by
And
Dave
so,
Soden.
Gary sent back feedback to third edition, the third edition team. We were going through it, and I remember he said, and I think the quote is, "And oh, that Dungeon Master's Guide." I reading through that, I learned quite a bit about being a dungeon master. That's gonna be a hard high point to beat in my career.
Nice.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
3 o'clock.
Good play. So, right there.
I learned from D&D through 3.5. It'll always be my D&D. Whatever edition they come out with, I'm always going to be 3.5. I understand that's the problem. But what was the difference in to sum up between 3.0 and 3.5 in your guys' opinion?
Wow. The haste spell, I think, gets a lot of attention.
Just fixed a lot of things.
It's tweaky. Yeah, it's a lot of tweaks.
Like general tweaking?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few regularizations of things that were, like some of the way like the monsters were built. Like there's a little bit, the monsters were a little more idiosyncratic in 3.0, and in 3.5 we pulled in some of the behind the curtain skeleton of how the monsters are built. Just because, they say that consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. I'm a little small-minded sometimes, I guess, and that just bugged me, right? And we wanted to try and square up a couple things like that.
Well, in the full code is a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin.
Well,
Consistency is a great thing.
So Scaff hated it. What would he say if he was here? Do you
Gaff
know
hated
what?
3.5?
Yeah,
Really?
he went around calling it 2.9, but Scaff can be an asshole sometimes.
Really?
I love him, dearly.
some of the buffing strategy, because the buffing strategy in 3.0 with like the way the spells last for a very long time. So you would go in the dungeon, and the first thing would happen is the fighter would drain the cleric of spell power. By come on, give me my stuff.
Right.
My bull strength, give me the endurance. I want my +4 strength. I want my +4 con. And by making that into a tactical choice about whether you wanted to put that on somebody before a fight, as opposed to you don't leave the dungeon, leave the tavern until type of condition. So it took some of the buffing strategy out of 3.0 that we felt was actually kind of broken and a little bit tedious at the time.
So what would Scaff say if he was here?
Scaff would say it was not broken or tedious, and he wants to know why we killed his fun.
Do you agree with that?
I would say the same thing, actually.
Okay,
I would
so
agree with,
that's
I would agree
actually
with
a
Scaff
fair-
on that one.
you're gonna chant. Okay, well, I think if you want to get to the heart of it, this might be it, right? The question is, what's the difference between 3 and 3.5?
Well,
let's see if we can reconstruct this argument.
Let's back up a little bit, because the first of all, the design team was slightly different.
right.
Andy
Totally.
Cowell,
That's true.
I didn't work on
Monty was
3.5.
not there, and
I
I
didn't
was
work on
there, and he didn't work on it. Yeah, and I was somewhat involved, and Rich was even more proficient. So there's a new team, and they had been playing the game, and what they were trying to do is apply their campaign experience to the rules, and that's why the rules are the way they are, is because they were things that they were finding that were unsatisfying or broken or.
Well, and to be fair, right? When we did 3.0, we had a lot of time, but it was a finite amount of time, and so there were things that didn't get as much attention as other things, right? Lower level spells got more attention than higher level spells, and so one of the things that 3.5 did that I think was good was they went and they sort of cleaned up some of the higher level effects that we just kind of let slip through our fingers, right? Haste isn't very high level, but is a good example of something that we just sort of We should have caught haste, right?
I mean, we loved it, right? It did exactly what it said it should do. It felt logical, it felt intuitive, and it was really kind of broken. But it made so much sense, we didn't want to mess with it, right? Until we decided we had to.
And there were a couple of things that probably didn't need to change. Like, for example, there was resistance was applied per round in 3.0 and per attack in 3.5. That probably didn't need to change. But the team liked it better.
I think we have the answer. The design team changed, so therefore some of the rules change. I'll say as a business guy, whenever you hire a new accountant, you end up changing CPA firms. When you hire a new lawyer, you end up changing law firms. You hire a new designer, you're going to change the rules. It's just the way it is. Let's go to a new question. Right here. Yeah.
So, was there anything that made it into 3.0 that anyone up there felt that, like, just adamantly was against? Like, I don't want that in there. Or did you all come to an agreement?
Oh, sure, we all loved it. All the time. I used to joke that the game was not perfect because I didn't win all the arguments. But I've become a convert since then.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm having a hard time imagining something that got into the game that just incensed me or galled me, and so I said I got the benefit of getting a chance to kind of work in some of the fun earlier stages and doing a lot of the concepting and initial drafts on things, and then I didn't have to do the hard work at the end of actually really stitching it together. So from my point of view, I was maybe sad a couple of ideas that I thought were brilliant that I put in earlier wound up getting nerfed or changed or rearranged later on, but by and large, I love the way it turned out,
I'm going to go back to this side.
I'm talking monsters for a second. I'm not sure how involved you were in the monster manual itself, or if it was you, or it was some other people who worked with you. I got the impression on the 3.0 that there were a lot of monsters that were like following too tightly on the second level or each steps, and I never knew if it was like, oh, we got out of time and let's just convert things quickly, or it was like trying to keep the exact same flavor we had before. So I'm with you, kind of probably like tell me how you managed to go through them and where you felt you might have wanted to spend more time on them or that sort of thing.
There was a decision made early that 3.0 should have everything that the old game had.
Right.
And that, of course, wasn't possible with one book. So the selection of monsters was in there because these were what we thought were the iconic monsters of the game, with an emphasis on dungeon delving.
Right.
So that's how the mix was picked. The design, one of the decisions I disagreed with was, okay, we're gonna do the core. Somebody's going to write the basics of how monsters work, and then we're going to farm it out to a lot of different authors, which is an idea I really hated. But that's how, so I think a lot of it was just there were too many cooks in there, too many cooks stirring the pot. I did get it back again. I did a final before I went to editing.
Yep.
I guess my question is, what are you guys doing after panel? You want to play D&D with us?
Wish I could.
All right.
I'm going off to run a second edition game, and I'm serious. I'm doing a second edition game over in the stadium.
That sounds awesome.
You guys mentioned the Spirit Summoner Gnome. Obviously, one of them making the cut, one of them not. Were there any other races or classes that did make the cut for some odd reason that we haven't gotten to see the light of day?
I never agreed with cutting out the assassin. I always want to see
The assassin's there.
Assassin got back in.
It's in the prestige class.
I know.
So easy to get into.
Oh, we stuck pretty close to the script,
Yeah.
right? Like you look at the classes and races, and there's not a lot of surprises.
All right, here.
In my head, and this may be a fiction that I made up, D&D 3.0 was almost like this Hail Mary pass. Like you have a game system that hasn't changed in a very long time,
Yeah.
that it's sort of stagnated. It was sort of a mess of books,
Yeah.
and it kind of felt like, man, we're just gonna go for it. There's not as much to lose at this point
Yeah.
as there might have been in, say, 1984. And so you guys were just sort of let go with like whatever you could do. I mean, is that a fair characterization? Or
I think that actually redounds to Peter's credit that he took the restraints off us, right, and said, make a game that a gamer will want to play, and
I think I'd like to comment on this one.
Yeah.
I think the because that one thing that I felt strongly about, and I was certainly aware of a lot of other RPGs and different things that I'd done. I was a big fan of Jonathan Tweets, why I brought him onto the team, and but I said, D&D is a gamery game. This is, let's not be afraid to. I always felt that there were people that said that would talk about AD&D like it wasn't that complicated. And it's like, no, it may not look complicated because a lot of the rules are just hidden. You can't find them, right? If you took all the rules in AD&D and brought them into the player's handbook and structured them and put them right in your face, you would see that, oh my God, it's actually really complicated. And it's even more complicated in third edition because a lot of the rules just don't make any sense, like the saving throws table or something, right? And also, I think I was very heavily influenced with our activities with Magic the Gathering, of course. This is 1997. All my experience running a company up to that point, mostly I'd gone through with Magic the Gathering. And Magic's a very complex game. And sales were good.
Yeah.
So, I kind of had this. I kind of was, a big FU to all the people who are saying, you can't have games be too complicated, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, we're not dumbing this down. We're going to make a very tactical game, and it's... If somebody wants an easy RPG,
right?
They're great. Go play an easy RPG, I'm okay with that. But that's not D&D. D&D is the game that dares. I think one of you said it's to get dares to define how fast a Pegasus can fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 points to that. One is that we touched on this earlier. We actually did have a meeting where we asked the question: how much of the audience are we willing to lose to make sure that the game has a future in the 21st century? We asked that question and we answered it.
Yeah, exactly.
Frankly, I don't even remember the answer.
And I must say one other thing on that is that I always said the rules have to. The D&D is a simulationist sort of, to use the Ron Edwards way he would describe it. It's a simulationist game.
That's right.
Which means that as if you're appealing to people who want a simulation of this fantasy combat system,
A physics engine.
the physics engine. If you're going to do that, then most of all, the rules have to make sense. Like, you want this thing to be able to have a really good chance of reconstructing the rules in your head, a better chance of memorizing them if there's an underlying physics engine logic to how everything
so everything's
works.
relatable.
I don't want to go dark, but there was sort of a Hail Mary sort of aspect to this, though, right? Second edition sales toward the end were awful, right? It wasn't a matter of, maybe if we just kind of put some polish on second edition and call it third edition, it would be great, right? we needed to take some drastic action, and if third edition failed.
It was really the last good shot.
But
I think.
Okay, here's
what
what I'm still not gonna going for this. The Hail Mary implies that you're down. You're down 6 points, and you're 60 yards away from the goal, and you're gonna lose the game. I never felt that way about D&D. I was confident that third edition was going to be a huge success, and that we were on the right track. Right. And that the edition we were doing was fantastic, and that you guys were doing awesome work. So to me, it never felt like a Hail Mary. It was more like, we're going to kick ass with this game.
Right. One of the things I said early,
but we needed to kick ass, I guess.
We did, we did for various reasons. But one of the things I said early on, and this might have been even before we officially started, was one of the things we don't do. We do not make this game like the other games that we're beating in the marketplace already. Right. There's a reason that we're still the top game, even though we're in relative decline. We're still the top game, and we want to stay the top game. And I want to touch on something.
You had to stay D&D.
Right, we had to stay D&D.
Well, yeah, you had to stay true to the premise.
Right.
We haven't even talked about the sacred cows list.
Right, that's true. People used to come to me all the time and say sacred cows make the best hamburger. Well, We made sure all the sacred cows were still mooing.
So maybe there's somebody back here. I've been counting way back. All right, you, sir.
With respect to like the open gaming license, did you guys know that you would be making like not just D&D but like all of these other things that were spawned out with like the D20 system? And
I didn't.
Not until the very end. Yeah, we were basically done.
Yeah, that was essentially Ryan Dancy's strange genius, you know, and we had, I think, very little input and kind of encouraging towards that decision.
So
How we talked you into it, I have no idea. But
That's great.
So I thought it was great, but when I was a kid and I bought Metamorphosis Alpha, it was my second role-playing game, it was my TSR, I was furious that it was not a D20 game. I was furious that the stats were different, the attacks are different. It's like I'm literally hitting somebody with a hand weapon, and you're telling me to use different rules? Why? Does D&D suck? Are these the right rules? Why aren't they the same? And before I got on the team, I was working on, I don't know if people remember the Odyssey line that had all these weird Jack Endor, the Island of the Necromancers and Barbarians, and there's all these sort of strange settings. I was going to do Gamma World. I had talked people into it. We were going to do a D20 version of Gamma. It wasn't called D20, but it's going to be the Dungeons and Dragons rules version of Gamma World. And when Ryan Dancy took over to be the creative, the brand manager, first thing he wanted to do was strip off all the secondary lines. So we had a product that was for Ravenloft. It was a collection of monsters for Ravenloft. He just took the Ravenloft logo off of it, and we released it without the Ravenloft logo, and it sold better than any other Ravenloft product. Because D&D players are like, oh, D&D, I'll buy it, right? And so the idea that we would do, what he wanted to do is let's focus everybody, and he did it super successfully. He's sort of the person that is not up here, but was also super instrumental in getting the game to be successful because he focused everybody on the D&D experience, and he told me he did not want to see me mess with a new setting with those rules like that, not in a million years. So I was all teed off or whatever. Later on comes along, oh, he's got this new idea. And his idea was very much better than mine.
That's a marketing guy for you.
But his idea was better than mine because he said anybody would be able to jump in on it, and that really helped bring everybody in the industry together to support us.
All right, right here.
Question, I guess, individually for each of you. Which monster would you say awards the most enjoyable combat experience?
Let's just say one of you so we get more questions. Who wants to?
It skips the monster guy, I think.
Yeah.
Well, my go-to monster is the Ogre Magi.
Good choice.
Because it's versatile.
That's a respectable choice.
That's a great choice.
It's reversible, right? It's a melee engine,
Yeah.
and it's sneaky, and it's got some spells, and you can do a lot with an Ogre Magi.
Perfect.
Hey, you said you didn't want to emulate games you're beating in the market, but obviously you're building this game 20 years after the RPG kind of origin. As I know you said you worked at ICE, and obviously you took stuff from the process. I was wondering if there were any other things that stood out in your mind, something that you did in this other games.
I always say that the biggest influence on 3rd edition D&D was 2nd edition D&D. But yeah, I mean, we were all game players. We'd played a lot of games, so of course there's a lot of influence on things that we'd either worked on or played on. I can't think of too many things that I would say we directly kind of ported over, but
I'll say it's a type of influence that I really actively tried to engineer in this, which was Magic the Gathering. Not in a very direct mechanical sense, but and I really hope I don't offend any of you guys by this, but my experience with the TSR people that came over from Lake Geneva, you guys and all your colleagues, and Magic the Gathering people were very opposite people in terms of where the types of discussions you would have with them, the types of approaching the problems, the types of material that they would design. And my dream of Wizards of the Coast was to figure out how to cross-pollinate these. I don't think I was terribly successful at it in most places, but I think that in the case of here, I think we did a really good job of this with D&D. I think that there was yeah, I would like to give Magic some of that credit, just in the sense of a more analytical approach.
I'll tell you, one of the things that kept running through my mind, particularly in the first year, was, okay, we are working for the publisher of Magic, which is a very complicated game, as we pointed out, but people play this game for money without a referee. So we can make D&D a heck of a lot more accessible than it is.
And so I want to double down on what Peter was saying. He didn't talk much about it, but he was the lead designer for a while. He took, when what we were doing was sort of not going far enough and not really delivering on the promise, he sort of stepped in and said, I'm going to set you guys straight, and really pushed us to do more. And so, I mean, and then even when you weren't on the design team, your vision for how, like, we can make any change if it's demonstrably better. If, like, we can show that, okay, it's going to be painful to change initiative, but we can see that it's better. So I want to make sure everybody knows that you have every right to be up here as one of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Back there on the right, on my right, your left. That's you.
Right.
Yeah.
So before you guys started getting sales figures back on third edition, when did you know you had a hit? Like, I'm assuming there was a point where you knew.
I would say actually we had a pretty good sense even in the playtesting rounds when we a fellow that's once again not up here but probably deserves some credit is Kim Mohan.
Yeah.
Who did an amazing amount of work and kind of taking point in issuing and collating playtest feedback on the core books, and we could kind of tell from very early on. Yes, there were people who were really opinionated about whether this thing should get a feat here, or should get a feat there, or whether this spell should do 3d6 or 2d6. But by and large, we had an immensely popular playtesting program that was getting huge feedback, huge participation, and was generating an immense amount of excitement. So I think by the time we started to see those coming in, we had a pretty good sense. Okay, we're pretty sure we got it right. We think we've designed a good game.
Here's when I knew, because remember this is 2000, right? So this is when the internet is becoming really a big part of all of our lives, and so we were seeing people's responses on the internet. And the first responses we were getting were things like, "Oh, the monk is way overpowered." And then someone else would say, "Oh, but the cleric is clearly the best. He's way overpowered." And someone else would say, "Oh, well, you wouldn't play anything but a sorcerer. The sorcerer is way overpowered." And they went through and said that about every single class. And I figured, okay, that's about right.
I have a more cut and dried answer because the company sells games ahead of time. So the first thing that most people don't understand is, first of all, the PR effort for 3E actually won an award. There was an industry award given. So the people who actually were out there promoting the game early did a great job.
Yeah.
And the advertising people said, "Wow, you're doing a great job."
And I think we ran playtesting out of the marketing department.
We did,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then the other thing is,
which I think was Ryan's clever way of trying to have some impact.
Well, I could tell Ryan stories again for a whole.
That's right. That's another panel.
Yeah, but so the other thing that happened was the pre-sales for the player's handbook started in like February. Right? When was it? We released it.
Yeah.
It was so we were selling the game really before it was finished, and the sales were already through the roof.
The Gen Con seminar where we were sitting in there with must have been a 1,000-seat theater. It was gigantic.
Oh, the announcement?
Yeah,
It's a big announcement.
Some of which is playing, by the way.
Yeah.
In
The museum.
Gen Con 50 Museum over at Lucas Oil Stadium, right on the 50-yard line.
Yeah.
Peter, did you have anything to do with that?
Well, I also think that everybody wanted us to win.
Yeah.
I mean, after what TSR had gone through, the near bankruptcy and years being managed by someone who was just horrible.
Like they literally couldn't print anymore, right?
and-
Like they were out of money and they couldn't get any loans, and so they couldn't print, so they couldn't make money to pay back the loans. It was hard.
Yeah, and even going back, tragedy of Gary losing control of the company, and just so many things happened to this company over the years, and then comes over, and then this radical change of coming over to Seattle and being part of a bunch of Magic guys. And then so long since there was second edition, it was a long gap. So we had that going for us. I think that people really wanted to see D&D have a win, right? I think people were giving it its best shot, approaching it with a really good attitude. That was what I felt out of that. All right, one more. Is there a woman has a question? It's been all men so far. Yes.
Say thank you for making all the female characters have equal
Well,
that was a DC-1 wisdom check.
Yeah. that was an easy one.
I mean, that's yeah. You're welcome. Yeah,
our
good.
pleasure.
Yeah, our pleasure. Our
Yeah.
pleasure. Absolutely. I mean, there's all sorts of other. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I have a question kind of related to what you were saying, actually. One of the things that struck me going from second edition to third edition, other than the fact it's obviously a vastly different engine, but the narration and the way it was presented, the pronoun, the common generic pronoun used, where did that come from, being she instead of he all the time, which I absolutely loved. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Well,
I felt like we were in, the new century coming up.
Well, I think was it just an extension of the style guide we already had, right?
Well, it was.
I don't.
I mean, it comes from, we basically we created the iconic characters, right? And so the iconic paladin was a woman. And so whenever you talked about paladins, you just said she. And it came across pretty straightforward and logically.
And actually, that was one of those eureka moments. It's like, okay, we're either going to use, that's what we say, we're either going to use the iconic character's name.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, wizards are Miley. Or we're just going to say she.
But back in '92, I did the game Over the Edge. Is started sort of one of the things that inspired the indie role-playing innovations, and I used she for the game master and he for the player. But again, trying just to find a way to bring in a mix of pronouns without making a big deal.
Well, and there's certainly a broader WotC corporate philosophy at stake. Remember that Marshall Saling was on a panel yesterday. Amazing, one of the people I respect very, very deeply. She was executive editor from 1990 for Magic the Gathering, Talismana, Primal Order, and right from the beginnings, I'm not going to work here if we ever use masculine pronouns for someone of indeterminate gender. And it's just not going to happen.
Right.
And so we had been doing very careful about gender usage with Magic the Gathering from the get-go. So this was
We got hate mail for it, by the way.
Yeah. I still remember the Pinko Kami. It was the only time I've ever been called a Pinko Kami.
Well, I think that's a good note to leave on.